All right, now that we've had a chance to really dig into the reading analysis portion, let's get to the good stuff. How do we get our kids to write to show their understanding? So after we've read, our students should be able to communicate what they picked up from reading. Responses, we want responses to do a lot of the same things our reading did. Address that focus skill. Offer a detailed explanation to clarify understanding. And use relevant text evidence to support the understanding. I think these are kind of the critical components we need to focus on. Now, when you guys are having students respond in your classrooms, what are kind of the key things you're looking for?
I want to know that they, number one, understood the question. I want them to address the question and be on topic for the question. I want them to have text evidence that shows, like, this is where I got my answers to the question from, and I want them to be able to explain their text evidence and say, like, you know, I know the author's purpose is this because the figurative language created these images that automatically drive me to this.
And I would build on what you're saying and almost take it one step further with their explanation as to why it's important. Mm-hmm. Why are we sharing this message with an audience in the first place, and how does it connect, you know, back to my life? So
it's a really good point. I told my kids a lot of times I wanted them to write their responses in a way that they were teaching me. Like, I didn't know anything about this passage, so they had to explain it to me so that I would understand what they're talking about. I think you guys kind of hit that on the head there. So as we look at this, here are a few strategies that have been popular in the past. You may have a strategy for student response that you cling to that works really well for your kids. It may be one of these. So just a couple of things: ACE, RACE, ICE, and RAP. You'll notice there are different variations of each of the components, but they all kind of have the same core pieces to them. Like, in all of them, there's some sort of answering or restating. Chris, you said you wanted them to understand the question, so that's that restate piece. Giving that text evidence, which is the citing, and then explaining and telling why it's important, like Jennifer was calling out there. Most of them even use the same wording. I think the only one that's different is RAP, and it kind of rolls the citing and explanation into that prove component. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you guys. I don't feel like the acronym is all that important. I think the key here is whatever tool that is chosen, we're teaching our kids to have, again, those core pieces in their responses so that they're full and accurate.
Absolutely.
We have put together a sample response. So again, we're sticking with English 1.7D, analyze characteristics and structural elements of an informational text. So after doing all of that reading and all of that analysis, the question that I wanted them to boil all of their notes down to was this: how does the author use evidence to support the controlling idea? And it's kind of twofold. First, they've got to identify the controlling idea, and next, they have to do what the question asks and explain how the evidence supports it. So this response is, I think, fairly good at that. The author uses evidence in the passage to support the controlling idea with concrete data. In order to support the idea that restroom hand dryers produce sound harmful to children's ears, Ingram provides real-world data from Keegan's study, noting all accelerator models, the Blast and the Dyson Airblade and Airblade 5 models, were louder than 100 decibels, adjusted decibels, when hands were in the airflow for all measurements in paragraph 7. The data is also clarified in paragraph 8, where it is shared that the average loudness levels approach that of a jackhammer directly adjacent to a person's ear. Using factual data gives credibility to the controlling idea. The reader is more likely to accept the controlling idea as true with research statistics listed as support.
I would love to get that answer from a student.
Yes, that's why it's an exemplar sample. Are all of our kids' responses going to look like this? Absolutely not. But this would be kind of my starting point. This is where I would want to steer them. And when I'm doing some modeled writing to show them how we want to create a response, this is what I'm working towards. And just to review this answer, let's make sure it's got the pieces. We do have our answer. It opens up there at the top. The author uses evidence in the passage to support the controlling idea with concrete data. Now, that answer doesn't call out the controlling idea yet, but does it talk about how evidence is being used? I think so. It's being used as to support it with concrete data.
Right.
Now, in the second section, where we're looking at text evidence, now that's kind of where we start to see the controlling idea listed in order to support the idea that the restroom hand dryers produce sound harmful to children's ears. There's your controlling idea.
Yep.
So most of our kids are going to put that controlling idea in the answer portion, but this would be an acceptable way to do it too. And then boom, text evidence. I don't know about you guys. In my class, I was doing good to get my kids to have one piece of text evidence.
Right.
I think for the full, again, robust answer here, having 2 components is awesome. But 1 is definitely acceptable. And then finally, they circle back. And Jennifer pointed out earlier, it's not just about answering, it's about telling why it's important. And I think that's what this explanation does. Using factual data gives credibility to the controlling idea. And it just ties back to the idea that we believe in facts. If you can show us the hard proof, we'll buy in. And that's kind of what this last statement is trying to illustrate.
I think that that's pretty powerful. And I think you could easily develop a rubric out of this to share with the students, to show them, like, this is how I'll be grading this, however you set up your standards. And that's going to do 2 things. It's going to set them up for success, knowing that they can grade their work before they turn it in, and check to see if they've made all the standards and checked it. And then as a teacher, if we're replacing multiple choice, I want to somehow get my grading speed up. A rubric would help do that as well.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest things that kind of we shy away from this type of response because it takes time. And yes, it does. It takes time to read these and it takes time to know what you're doing. But one of the things I found in working with these short answer responses in my classroom was by having an exemplar response and that rubric and knowing what I'm looking for and having read the passage and know what evidence should fit.
Right.
It's a lot easier to read through student responses if you know kind of the keywords, the key phrases that you're trying to see. It doesn't have to take that long.
Right. You can skim in and know.
Especially if this is a routine, right? If I've built in the routine of doing the ACE or ICE or RACE, all of my kids' responses are going to be similar in structure. I know we don't like formulaic writing. I don't think that's what this is. I think it's just about getting kids to respond in a way that makes sense, is structured in a reasonable way. And again, by having them use that structure, it speeds up my ability to read it, analyze it, give them some feedback, but ultimately adjust my instruction if needed.
Right. And I think that as you brought up the use of rubrics, you know, that's just part of our best practices in general.
Yes.
So sorry. But on top of that, it was interesting you just said the key phrases. For some of the students that we need to scaffold learning for, incorporating those key phrases into a rubric is yet another best practice to really help support. So we're helping guide those students without actually giving them the answers. So something to consider.
And I think early in the year, like as you're building in maybe one of those strategies, I think it's also acceptable to build in sentence stems or like a framed paragraph where I've constructed my exemplar response and then I've pulled out those critical details and just kind of left blanks. And I'm allowing them the first time through maybe to fill in blanks. And then they can, again, like training wheels throughout the year, I take away the scaffold of that frame paragraph or whatever and allow them to create their own writing. So, and speaking of creation, that's what we're going to do next. You'll have an opportunity to go back to the standard we used in the earlier portion of this module, create a question for a short answer response, and then create an exemplar response to the question you generate.